This is Literary Landscapes, and my name is Alona Thomas, and our interviewee today is Phillip Caron. Do you want to do an intro yourself?
Sure. My name is Phillip Caron. I write articles on Medium. I've been writing on Medium for about a year, and I've recently, over the past, since the virus and everything, I've been writing a lot more. And I really have been writing heavily for the last 3 months, about 3 to 5 articles a week for since about June. So yeah,
So pretty consistent. Yeah, that's
yeah,
good.
pretty consistent.
Yeah, the link to the Medium is down below, so you'll be able to read that as well as
Perfect.
Philip's social media. To sort of jump into questions a little bit, because we wanted to really dive into your brain. The first question is, what is your latest project about? And possibly what is the inspiration for your latest project?
So I kind of have developed a system for myself over the past month and a half. It's interesting for me to see how this has grown for me and how I make adjustments. A year ago, I was trying a lot of different things. I was trying YouTube, I was trying blog posts, I was trying podcasting. I was really trying to find a niche for myself that really I could do, number one, do consistently, because right now it's not normal, but I need something that I can do while I'm working and raising a family. And so I was trying a bunch of different things. And when the coronavirus hit, I knew that I kind of had to pick one. I was doing a lot and I was doing them all kind of badly, but I was just trying to get a taste for what really suit me. And I really settled on writing in, like I said, late May, early June, because I can work on it anywhere. Video editing takes a long time. I do enjoy it. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together, but it does take a lot of hours. And so I really settled on writing. And then as I started writing, I was writing all these articles and they were not very good. Back in September when I was writing, I was just getting some of my memories out on paper. And I had never written a blog post before. And I had been journaling my whole life, but I had never put something out for the public to see. And the writing was really bad. It was bad in a lot of different ways. It was bad because it wasn't edited well. The language wasn't good. And it also didn't sound like me. It sounded like I was speaking more neutrally, almost as if I was afraid to actually dive into intimate details.
That's a very in-depth analysis of your own writing. I think a lot of writers would really, I think even me, I would struggle to piece it apart and be like, definitely I can look at writing and go, this is awful. This is trash. I don't like this. But to take it apart and go, oh, this isn't necessarily the voice I want to portray, that's really developmental, I suppose.
I appreciate that. And so what I ended up doing was I had done a YouTube show, like I said, and one of the people that I interviewed was a friend of mine, and he had gotten an article published in a magazine or a journal somewhere. And so I knew that he was a good foundation for me to talk to about just general knowledge of writing. And I had wanted to start creating things because I was a chef for a long time, and I stopped being a chef because my son was born and there was a void that was missing creatively for me. And so I was trying all these things. And so I went to my friend, and his name is Jerry. And I went to Jerry and I said, what's up with my writing? And take a look at my writing, and can you tell me what you think? And some people, they give really nice feedback and they say, oh, you should work on this. And then other people give you really strong feedback, and you need to have both, I think, because sometimes you're not in the mental space to take someone tearing apart your writing. You worked on it for a really long time, and you really just want someone to say, I like the ideas and I like the direction you're going, because you're feeling really raw and sensitive about it. And then other times you're frustrated and you have more anger and you're like, I really want to push through this. I need some harsher feedback. And so for me, Jerry was the first person who said, look, your writing's just not that good. And he said, your ideas are good, but
you're still friends with Jerry? You're still,
we are.
That didn't break about
we're still talking. And he said, your writing is not that good because your ideas are good, but you're rushing to put it out. Okay. And you're rushing to put out your content before your ideas are finalized. You just write a 5-minute story, then you just push it out. It needs tightening up. Your first draft is not what you should be putting out for other people to see. And this is something that I didn't go into it knowing anything about the process of writing. I didn't know about really editing. I just said, I kind of want to tell these stories, and I'm going to try it because I've been journaling my whole life. And so when he gave me that feedback, I said, okay, I'm going to write some stories and I'm going to sit on them for a while. So I was able to make my first kind of level of growth as a writer, I guess you would say, because I got that feedback. I wrote a first draft, I sent it to a bunch of people, and they sent it back and they said, here's the ideas that I liked and here's the ideas I didn't like. And I sat on some of these stories for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and I was working on them. And the second level of growth for me was I was writing these articles and they still were sounding like I was trying to come from a level of authority. I was trying to sound confident about things that I wasn't confident in talking about, or I wasn't an expert in. And so I had a conversation with my wife, and she said to me, your writing is good, is getting much better, but it still doesn't sound like it has a voice, because it sounds like you're trying to speak about things that you don't know about, or you're speaking from a level of authority, or you're speaking from a place of half truths. And so maybe you should try some other avenues. And so that was in May, and I was feeling pretty sensitive about it. And I sat on it for a little while, and I decided to write some fiction. And that's when I realized that I could use some of these short stories to tackle some of the issues that I had in my own mind through a fictional story. I could take things I had been through, change the characters, change the names, change the scenario around slightly, but still embed the story in a little bit of truth, that it was true enough to me. And then the minute I did that, things just took off for me. You know, they're going much faster now. I mean, as I can see from us doing this show, I mean, this is such a cool thing that we made a connection on Twitter, and and now we're doing it and it's happening. And that would have never happened back in September for me. And so I started writing these fictional stories, and then I would sit on them for a while, and then I would edit them. And then my first story that everybody really seemed to like was the Battle of the Night story, that a lot of people that have reached out to me and said, this was an amazing story and it had a surprise ending. And that was a result of me developing as a person and as a writer.
I mean, definitely, I've always said you as yourself is a kind of a product of your experience and your product of your life. And so your writing, to be inspired sort of by day-to-day experiences, will make it very authentic at the very least. Put a lot of the emotion and a lot of the fear. And often I find when I'm writing, if I'm stuck in a scene, I will think to myself, and I'll just kind of put myself there, and I'm like, oh, what kind of mannerisms are they doing? Are they sitting really uncomfortably? Are they like touching their face or everything? Obviously, that does imprint a little bit of my mannerisms onto them, but I think definitely your experience feeds into your work. But you said were you writing nonfiction exclusively before you sort of made that switch?
Yeah, so initially what I was doing was I was writing about my experiences, but I was writing about them from a place of giving people advice, why you should do this, why you should do that, why. And what I realized was, number one, it's really oversaturated in my opinion. There's a lot of articles that tell you. And so I knew that the only way that I was going to get anyone to talk to me about anything was if I wrote from a level of being authentic, like you were just talking about. And so I was writing these generic articles, and then I was like, this isn't what I want to do. So I started making it more personal. And the minute I started making it more personal and more truthful, people started saying, we love your work. People were reaching out to me and saying, giving me the kind of positive feedback that I needed to kind of go forward.
Yes. What you were saying about the market being saturated, I definitely agree. Because when you said writing nonfiction about giving advice, my immediate thought was, that is the template for what I expect to see on blog posts and everything. And I think until I got into the writing community, I was like, oh, you don't just have to write about anything between tax dividends and cupcakes. Like, you can really choose.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I also learned recently, and I think that you actually mentioned this in your intro, I've learned that it's not just about the quality of your writing. It's also, you have to spend a lot of time now learning about networking and distribution, and I think this is what you mentioned before, was you can write this really great piece, or whatever that is defined by in your terms, but you can write something very personal and very intimate and put it out there, and it will just be shot out into the empty world. And then it created the cycle for me where I felt really like a downward spiral of, I'm writing these really deep personal things about my life, and people don't know exactly what they are, and nobody's really reading them. And I realized that on one side, I had to cultivate my writing, and on the other side, I had to develop my understanding of distribution. And so that's been big for me in the last month, of learning how to get beyond myself and reach out to people and make friends and do it in a productive way so that people have a reason to come see what you're doing. They have a reason to come to your blog page. They have a reason, it's equally as important to me.
Yeah, you can definitely get a level of sort of disillusion and definitely sort of feeling down about your writing, about yourself, when you kind of see big creators, whether that be on YouTube, switching over to the Instagram, Twitter world, or, and that can be really great creators like the John Green and Hank Greens of the world, or it can be the much more media focused, the Kim Kardashians and the Kylie Jenners. They post anything, literally anything, and it gets thousands of likes, thousands of comments, and it literally is just about platform, not necessarily about quality. Not saying either groups, they produce a level of quality of content, and it definitely is within their realms. I would say the Kylie Jenners is more about cosmetics and the beauty industry, and obviously the John Green, Hank Green, it's much more about the sort of philosophical and the writing. But definitely as a small creator, you can get downtrodden thinking, oh, only like 10 people, 10, 15 people liked it. And you actually realize when you look through the likes, you're like, oh, but these are the person I spoke to 2 days ago, or this is the person that read my book. And that's really, really positive in a way, because it's about quality. And I think the thing to remember is, obviously, the attention you get online doesn't necessarily translate directly to, if you were to release a book or something, translate to sales. A lot of it is the 2 seconds it takes to like a photo and then move on. And a lot of people that will be on their main feed. So definitely it's something to pursue and really build much deeper connections. I found that as well.
Well, I mean, you mentioned something really interesting, which was, sometimes you make something like, if you're very high level and you have a very high understanding of your craft, you'll make something that's really, really good, and you just put it out and people just kind of know this is really, really good. And you don't have to be as good at social media, because you've developed, like you were saying, you've accumulated an understanding of like, this person knows their craft better than anyone, and they've established a name naturally for themselves. But for a lot of us, or at least for me anyways, I'm not at that place yet. And so because I'm not at that place, I'm still developing my skills as a writer. I think I have to spend more time networking and building a network, whereas somebody who is very, very talented could spend less time and they could be more focused on their work, I think. So I think it definitely is a balance for sure.
Yeah, definitely. For example, my grandfather, he's a published author and he really enjoys that, which is exciting. But also he does not go on the internet whatsoever. He entirely entrusts all of his like author page and everything to someone else. And he's awesome. I have a photo of me and my dog. And I'm like, that's great. But all you've done is sit and write. And the thing is, he's very, very intellectual. So he writes everything from women's fiction to stuff about the Ottoman Empire, which is ridiculous. It's interesting, eclectic mix. But awesome. It is so dense and it's good writing, if not incredibly dense writing, which is interesting to read in women's fiction. You're just like, okay, good.
That's awesome.
But definitely that's really interesting, watching someone who has no interaction with the internet produce content. And I think that does come from, he started publishing maybe 20 years ago. So it was way before the whole Amazon ebooks and the massive flood of content. It's a really interesting balance. I did have another question for you to sort of move on. I guess, what gets you up in the morning regarding to writing, or generally keeps you motivated, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So for me, when I left being a chef, I had, like I said, I had this creative space that wasn't being filled with anything. And my son was just born at the same time. And so I was really thinking a lot about kind of legacy, and also how I wanted to raise him, and developing myself as a person. And so I thought to myself, I want to develop my ability to think. And so the clearest way for me to develop my ability to think is to read more books and to do more writing. Because to me, logically, writing is directly thinking. I mean, you think something in your head and then you write it on paper. And so I had this hour-long walk to work, and I would listen to audiobooks. And then most recently, I started buying a lot of the classics that I had never read before. I just went onto a website and said, okay, I'm going to start reading. And a lot of it came from the place of just trying to develop myself and kind of show my son that you can learn these things. It's not, I think sometimes people read books or they consume media or they look at things on YouTube and there's like a disconnect. Almost knowledge is like reserved for an exclusive, there are some people that have the knowledge already and they like, it's not for me. And for me anyways, I felt that way, like there was a disconnect, like you're a smart person and I'm just like a worker. And what I realized was that's just not the case. If I want to go and get books and read books and learn and develop, like I have access to that information and I can do that myself. And so a lot of it for me is legacy and writing down things that'll last forever. I think my goal that I was formulating was if I could get myself enough good quality short stories that I would eventually publish a book of short stories. That may be the route that I had wanted to go. So, but right now it's still just, I'm not even close to that yet. For me, it's just refining and really developing a larger vocabulary and more interesting sentences and better editing skills. But at the center of it all, I think is legacy for me.
I mean, there were some really interesting parallels. I've never heard of a chef coming out of being a chef and it not be about like searching for that high pressure environment and more about creativity. That's an incredible spin on it to sort of say, I want to actually create something. Also, much like sort of producing food, producing content to read takes so much time, but also is consumed really quickly. And you definitely get that feedback fairly quickly. So I think you doing a anthology over time, it's a good way to go about it, to create that legacy, because as you write, you will find gems in the rough and they're not necessarily all tied in this 80,000 word novel. Because definitely you can write a novel and there can be whole sort of sections and chapters that are amazing, incredible. And then actually you might find that your transition chapters are a complete snooze fest and you just don't know what to do with them. But being able to sort of work on a piece and then put it down and go, okay, that was pretty good. Let's see what I can do better. Means you can go back 6 months. I don't know whether you find it, but I definitely just sort of really big myself up a little bit. I sometimes go back in my writing and go, that's pretty good, as though I didn't write it. Like think, oh no, I'm pretty pleased with that. That's surprisingly good.
I will definitely have moments where I'll read a sentence and I'll go back. So I think I've published like 45 articles over the course of my time writing on Medium. And I'll sometimes go back and read certain sentences or certain areas in an article and think that was actually not bad. That's not bad. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Do you get that feeling of kind of, oh, I might be onto something? I get it a little bit when I get some good feedback and they go, oh, I really, really liked that bit. And I'm like, yeah, I liked that bit as well. Let's do more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have moments where, so sometimes, like The Old Man and His Cherry Whiskey and The Battle of the Knights, I didn't outline anything for them at all. I just wrote them. I sat down at my computer and I spent 3 or 4 hours and I just wrote the first draft. And so there are definitely moments for me where I just get in the zone and I'm just looking at my computer and the ideas are flowing really easily and I just go. And especially with editing, if you're going to do a 5-minute story or a 5-minute article like I'm doing, I've really realized that every single sentence has to be like necessary and it has to be good. If you're going to write 1,000-word article, you have to go through every sentence. And so for me, going back and reading every single sentence and going, I need to make this more interesting. Is this relevant? Can I cut this out? But then every once in a while, I'll come across a couple sentences where I think this is true and it's interesting. Both. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting because of what we talked about, like there is a massive market of writing. I would argue sort of the up and coming writers that are developing their craft, because you have to make it really good and you have to make it count. I think it will slowly beat out the sort of BuzzFeed or like mass media market where, I mean, I'm sure they're really good writers, but they are absolutely pushed for time to say, you need to write an article about this and it needs to go out in 2 days. And they don't necessarily have the luxury of sitting on it for 5-6 weeks because it's on kind of current news and current trends. So I think it'll be interesting to be able to spend time now developing your craft, and then later on, sort of, if you end up writing for anything from BuzzFeed to New York Times, you'll have that skill to know, okay, I know how to edit this well and quickly, because you get faster and faster every time you do it. I guess on a somewhat related question, as you're going through, are there any particular specific demons of your writing that you constantly do or constantly like have a problem with? I definitely know mine is I write really long sentences because my brain's going, yes, but it's all important. And that's true, but you can break it into pieces. So definitely going back, I spent a lot of time backspacing on commas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be two things. Number one, I use a lot of unnecessary words, or the writing is not very confident, so I'll put in a lot of words that I end up going back and going, I can this just say the thing that you need to say and delete all the things that make it seem like you're not sure if that's what you
Yeah.
want to say. And also, a lot of times I write really bland sentences, and I have
I
to
think we all
go.
do. I think we all
Yeah,
do.
you
Yeah.
know, like you say something like the tree is tall, and then you can imagine being somebody who clicks on the article and going, this isn't doing anything for me.
Yeah.
So those are my two.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I taught in primary school briefly, and one of the things that we picked up, especially if you got into sort of elementary school, sort of year 5, year 6, which is ages 10 and 11, is writing can be really good, but it can be really prescriptive. And I think there's a danger of that. So you tell them, don't write the tree is tall. But if you go, the leafy green tree is as tall as a mountain, it's technically right, but it doesn't read very well. So it's definitely interesting to sort of say, yeah, bland sentences are not great,
Sure.
but sometimes you just need the tree was tall and the man was being stabbed underneath it, like something exciting to like it doesn't matter that the tree is leafy and green and tall as a mountain. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about the next thing. So
That's a very good point. You know, sometimes it's okay, I have this boring sentence, but can I make something interesting happen in the boring sentence to make the sentence more interesting? So I totally agree.
I guess the final question I have for you is, I suppose you've talked a little bit about this, but what is the big dream for writing? I suppose you mentioned doing an anthology and leaving a legacy, but do you want to expand on that at all?
Sure. I mean, for like I said, for me, I think I always, when I got done with high school here, I went straight to culinary school. So I never went to a 4-year college. I never went to a university. And I think that for me, it's been developing the ability to think. You know, a lot of it is an entire cycle of you read a good book, you process that information, and then you do some work, and then you reflect on that work, and then you make new work and you read more, and then it just is a spiral upwards. It's really been, for me, over the last couple of years, it's been about just kind of squeezing life and trying everything and not putting myself into a box and using the time to develop skills. So I think that the goal, to answer your question, would be to develop myself enough to where I feel confident enough to publish something and put something out into the world, for sure.
That's really, really interesting because sort of contrastingly, from my high school, I did go on to do a undergraduate degree and then a graduate degree. And the funny thing is, I definitely think that in a weird way, because I didn't go straight into work and because I didn't actually craft anything that anyone specifically wanted, other than the ability to write essays and stuff that people have already written essays on, I didn't really necessarily have that work ethic. It can be a little bit of being knocked off your pedestal when you write something and you think, oh, but I got a first, or I got a 2-1, and someone go, this isn't very good, and you're like, but someone academic said that I was good at writing, but you're not necessarily. I think actually forcing yourself to go, no, I can be, because definitely being a chef has got to be so demanding, and university is not, it is demanding, but it doesn't have to be, because a lot of what you're doing is developing as a person from sort of 18 to 21, 22, and like when you're 18, you don't realize how little work ethic you actually have.
Yeah,
And
this is true.
And you're working on maybe like 6 essays a year or something like that. And my course was relatively light, but it means I had so much downtime, and it doesn't necessarily prepare you for the next bit. I've definitely seen other people who have worried about not being intelligent enough, but it's just not about that. As you've said, and as we've discussed, so much about it is putting it down and then coming back to it.
Well, I mean, it's so important. It's such an important point because, you know, for me, I'm 33, and something happened to me with having a son and going into my 30s, which was I went from actually, even though I was a chef, I had a lot of downtime, and wasn't aware of that downtime until I didn't have it anymore. And so shifting into my 30s has been really recognizing, hey, you really got to get going and start working on something and start working hard on something and utilizing your time like appropriately. Otherwise you're going to be 40 and then 50, and then you're going to miss out on when you were young and you felt like you had the energy that you could do the long days. So I mean, I completely agree with you with that. And for me, in the beginning last year when I wrote a few articles, it was important because I was so petrified of doing anything. I had a lot of people who were my friends who really encouraged me back in September. Sometimes you just need a couple wins. And so I think the point of it is like, sometimes when you're first starting out, you just need to put out some garbage articles and get it out of your system just to get in the habit of putting things out regularly or finishing projects and working at it consistently and get that loop of work and reflect and step away going. Because I know for me, from my own issues, that it was very difficult for me to put my work because I had low self-esteem about it. So part of this putting 3 to 5 articles out a week has been to get it out of my system, to get in the habit of posting like, okay, I've written 50 articles now. It's very easy for me to go and look at the stats every day and how much money I've made on Medium every day. And like I was doing it with YouTube of looking at my views every day and like still being attached to that with the part of me that's insecure. And so by producing all the time and keeping that ball rolling of like, okay, read today and then write and then edit and then start another story, like getting it going is sometimes it's half the battle, where you put it out and then once that ball's rolling, then you can go back and start working on quality. But so for me, that's kind of worked.
No, that's really, really good. I guess just to wrap up, is there anything or any articles you really want to mention on your Medium, which is down in the description, that you really want to say, give this one a chance, especially if it's not your most popular one?
No, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. Honestly, I would say that I've divided my writing into 2 separate sections. That's kind of the direction it's evolved, where one section of my writing is fictional short stories, and another section of my writing is reflections. And those reflections, you've read a couple of them, are more rooted in the real world and what's going on here and now. But my fictional stories, as fiction is actually rooted in the real world too. So those stories, actually, all of them are real things. Every single story that I've written has to do with something that I've been through in my life. And I've Battle of the Nights, The Old Man and Sherry Whiskey, one I did recently, Man Overboard. Each of these stories, there's elements of truth and the messaging. I think the reason why I picked 5-minute stories was because I was reading a lot of books, and I've been reading a lot of books lately. Like I have my whole, so many right now. I went to Barnes & Noble and spent too much. But I realized as I was reading them that each story has some sort of philosophical message in it. There are some themes to the book. And I thought to myself, well, number one, my attention span at this moment is still pretty low. So a 5-minute article may be all I can get through right now.
I think you in much of the world, but yeah.
Yes, trust me, I'm working on it. But also, if I could find a way to take philosophical messages and put them into a 5-minute story and get the same sort of response as a longer story, but still have philosophical content, that to me was important. So I guess I would say if you read anything, read a lot of my fictional stories for sure.
Okay, I will definitely link the very top ones down below for people to read. But I guess that wraps it up. Thank you, Phillip, for coming on. His social media, Phillip Caron, is down below. Check out other videos we have up on this site. But thank you so much, Phillip. This is Literary Landscapes.
Thank you. It was really great.
That's great. Yeah. This is Literary Landscapes. My name is Alona Thomas. If you're interested in anything I have to say, not at all as interesting as him, please check out below as well. I've got my social media. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.